In this tutorial we're going to look at fertilizers and why they are so important to farmers, how fertilizers work and why there's been a growth in the use of fertilizers across the world. As you can see from this picture, certain countries around the world have increased their fertilizer consumption, and these are mainly the developing countries such as China, Africa, Brazil and so on. Other countries use a lot of fertilizer, but their amounts are actually decreasing. This tends to be mainly the developed countries such as the European Union. We'll cover the fact that fertilizers increase crop yield and how they work through their roots. Fertilizers are chemicals that provide plants with essential chemical elements and what those particular elements are. Here are two bags of fertilizer. One of them is for domestic use for the lawn. The other one is for farmers to use. On the left we can see on the lawn fertilizer it's got these three numbers here. These actually refer to the amounts by weight of three essential elements in this fertilizer: nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. It's called the NPK numbers. On the right hand one, it wouldn't be immediately obvious that this was a fertilizer until we look at the chemical formula here of NH4NO3, which of course means ammonium nitrate. It's a rich source of nitrogen. Nitrogen is used by plants to make proteins for growth. So, homeowners put fertilizer on their lawn to increase its growth and make it look more green and lush. Farmers use fertilizer in order to increase the yield of their crops because it increases the growth of each of the individual plants. Fertilizers are soluble substances, usually salts like potassium nitrate or ammonium sulfate or ammonium phosphate, which are added to the soil. They dissolve in rainwater, and this is very important. They must first dissolve before they can be absorbed then by the roots. The plant particularly needs three important elements: nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, and it uses these for various reasons. Nitrogen particularly is used by the plant in order to make proteins for growth. So growing crops is an important business across the world, and it's important that we feed the population, and therefore farmers need to use fertilizers in order to maximize the profits that they get from their land. Of course, those nutrients could be replaced organically using manure or slurry, but these can be difficult to spread, can be expensive, and may not be available in a particular area. An exam question: potassium sulfate dissolves in water. A neutral solution is made. What's the pH of the potassium sulfate solution? It would be a pH of 7. And why is it important that a fertilizer dissolves in water? Well, it must be soluble so that the fertilizer can be taken up through the roots. And here are the answers to that question. The answer had to include either roots or the method of it transferring, which is called osmosis. The exam specification says you must recognise the essential elements given the formula of a fertilizer. Each of these elements has an important role within the plant. The nitrogen is used to make green foliage, it's for growth. Phosphorus makes strong roots, and potassium is needed for healthy growth of the plant. As we've seen before, these three elements, nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, are often on the label of the fertilizer, and the masses, or the amounts by mass, are given on the label. Here's an exam question. Ammonium sulfate is a fertilizer used by farmers. Ammonium sulfate has the formula NH4 twice SO4. It contains one of the essential elements needed by plants. Write down the name of one essential element needed by plants. Well, here the essential element, which is in this one, is nitrogen, but I could also have written potassium or phosphorus. And why do farmers use fertilizers? This would be to increase the plant growth. Here are the answers. And here's the answer. Particularly for the second question, there were many possible answers to replace essential elements, for example, which have been used by the plants or which are depleted in the soil. Natalie enjoys gardening. She visits a garden centre and buys 3 bags of different chemical fertilisers. The names are shown there. She's got to choose the correct fertiliser for her plants, and she uses the internet to find out about them. She finds out that nitrogen is used to improve leaf and stem growth. So which fertiliser will improve the leaf and stem growth? Will it be which one of these? Well, the only one there which contains nitrogen is the ammonium nitrate. So her answer is ammonium nitrate. The formulas of the other 2 don't contain any nitrogen atoms. Natalie also finds out that phosphorus improves root growth. So which chemical fertiliser will improve the root growth? Let's look for the symbol for phosphorus, which is P. That would be the calcium phosphate then. And in this case, there's only one possible answer for each question. Another question. Dylan's a farmer. He uses fertilisers to make his plants grow bigger and faster. Fertilisers contain 1 or more of 3 essential elements, which are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Look at the diagram. It shows the bags of fertiliser that Dylan has bought. They're marked NH4NO3. How many of the essential elements are here? Well, there's only the symbol here for nitrogen, so there's only 1 essential element here, nitrogen. Dylan puts this fertiliser on his fields. How does this fertiliser enter the plants? It will enter the plants through the roots. And there's the accepted answers for that particular question. Another aspect of the specification is to know that fertilisers can be generally very good, but overuse of fertilisers can be bad, and you have to understand this particular process, which is called eutrophication. You also have to understand that fertilisers are absolutely necessary in order to feed the world population, but that they can cause problems, for example, the pollution of water supplies. These pictures all show what's called algal bloom. This is where there's a massive growth of algae in water. Sometimes this is caused by sewage, or by effluent from a factory, for example, but often it's caused by the overuse of fertiliser, which makes its way into the watercourses. What happens is the fertiliser, which contains nitrates and phosphates, washes into a nearby stream or lake. This causes the algae in the lake to multiply, and the algae forms a thick blanket on the surface of the water. This stops any light from going through the surface down to the bottom of the lake or river, and stops the plants there from growing. These then die. These, along with some of the algae which also die, enter the water, and these are fed upon by bacteria or other microorganisms which are what are called aerobic. They use up oxygen. The oxygen gets used up in the water, and that means that there's no oxygen there for the fish or other aquatic animals, and they die. Now, some weaker students believe that it's the fertilisers themselves which kill the fish, that poison the fish, but that's wrong. The nitrates and phosphates make the algae grow. The algae stops the light getting to the plants at the bottom of the river or lake, stops them from photosynthesizing. They die along with some of the algae itself. The plants are decomposed using microorganisms. These are aerobic, they use up oxygen, and now there's no oxygen in the water, so the fish and other aquatic animals die. This process is called eutrophication. Returning to the picture that we started this off with, there is a worldwide growth in fertiliser use without a doubt, and this is because the world population is increasing. People across the world need feeding, So farmers are having to produce more and more food on the same amount of land. This intensive farming takes it out of the soil. It means that the soil becomes depleted in essential minerals. And as there isn't enough manure to enrich the soil organically, farmers will add fertiliser because it's easier to spread than manure. It's not natural or organic, but it's not harmful either. It just isn't sustainable. It uses up raw materials that aren't renewable. Overuse can produce eutrophication, and fertilisers can also wash into and pollute our water supplies. Nitrates in particular are toxic and very difficult to remove from our drinking water.